Okay, so talking about grant writing today. One of the ways that I like to talk about grant writing with folks is to compare it to a job application process. So grant writing is a lot like that process in a couple of different ways. That it can be really helpful if you know what you want to do before you start looking. There are a lot of opportunities out there, and the more clear that you are going into the search process and into the writing process, you'll have a greater chance of success at finding what it is that you're really after. And it's really about matching your mission with a funder's mission. So all funders have things that they want to accomplish in the world and accomplish in communities, whether it's the federal government or a private funder or a local community foundation. They all want to achieve something and some quality of life issue. They want to address some problem that's in the world. And the more that you can align your mission with what they're looking for with your project or your business, the better fit it will be. And then the last piece, thinking about long-term happiness. Sometimes we pursue a grant opportunity that looks like something that we could do or we could make happen, or maybe we need a piece of equipment and this program seems like a good way to get it. But it's really about making that match for the long term. Is it really in your long-term goals to be following this particular program? And just like a job, sometimes what sounds interesting and appealing at the beginning, maybe a higher salary or other features, might not necessarily guarantee long-term happiness. So really asking some of those questions up front about, is it a good match for what I want to do? So there's an overarching grant writing process that we're going to talk about and then go into detail about some of these. And I really encourage folks to think about developing your idea first. Before you even start looking for funders or thinking about what the landscape might be like, really think hard and long about your idea. And then work to build kind of a draft proposal. So this can be a generic proposal that meets a few key building block purposes, and we'll go through that as well. And then you can start to look for a funder. So once you have a basic idea of what it is that you want to accomplish, that's a good time to start seeing what somebody might be interested in supporting. Once you find your funder, you can customize your proposal to meet their specific requests. And the building of relationship with a funder is kind of ongoing throughout the search process, as well as after you receive a grant on through reporting. So that's a big part of it. And, of course, implementing and reporting once you do get some funding. Another way to look at this is on a timeline. You may want to craft a timeline for yourself, thinking about what it is that you want to do within your business or your organization or your group that you're working with. Thinking about your idea, again, is a long process and something that you can develop with your team. Let me see if this pointer works. And then so drafting your proposal is another part of that you may want to plot on a timeline. If you're working towards a specific project or proposal, you may want to do that in advance of knowing when that funding deadline might be. Looking then for the potential funder and identifying one is important. And then, of course, you need to know what their deadlines might be. If they fund each year, some fund a few times each year, maybe quarterly. So it just depends on the funder what their time frame is. And then customizing your proposal, you may want to plot that out as well. Make sure you have adequate time to go through all of these steps. Submission, again, is likely a very fixed date on the side of the funder, and so that one's the one we have the least control over, but if it's a realistic date, we want to make sure we have that on our calendars early on. then it takes a lot of time to implement the project, and you'll likely have a very separate timeline sheet for your project implementation, all of the steps that you'll need to follow for that. But maybe you have an end date in mind, or maybe the grant is 12 months, or maybe there's some other circumstances in which you'll know when you expect to finish up. There's often reporting along the way. So sometimes you have an interim report, and sometimes you have a final report once the project is finished. Sometimes there's even an outcome report that you may do a year after the end of the project. Okay, so there are a lot of questions to ask about developing your idea. And this is, again, where I think that when folks spend the most time working on this piece with your team and with anybody else who might be involved in the project, advisors, other groups, people who've done this kind of thing before, when you can spend a lot of time developing your idea, it will save you time later. The writing part for a lot of people seems to be the most stressful, but it's because they don't know exactly what it is that they want to do. So the more time you can spend working and developing your idea, this is where your proposal begins to take shape. So this is kind of the who, what, when, where, why, how questions. And the what is usually what we start with, because that's kind of how our brains work. What is it that I want to do? What can we do? And what's important to do? So whether you're working on some kind of new technology for a farming operation, or a new process at a farmer's market, or a new way of doing business, or maybe there's a comprehensive educational program that your local foods promotion group wants to do. This is where you really think together about what it is that we want to do, what's important. Along with that come some of the practical needs. What equipment, materials, people, training, partners would I need to make that project a reality or that idea come to fruition? Here's also where your when, where, and who can fit in. Some bigger questions to answer during this time, which may change the what question, are why. If we're successful, what will be the impact? Is there some bigger community change that we're hoping to support? And sometimes those are addressed as kind of those big quality of life questions. Is our project geared towards health and nutrition, lowering obesity? Does it have some kind of end goal of improving environmental quality of the soil, or building strong communities, some kind of overarching goal that makes a bigger impact in society? Sometimes by framing our project in light of that, we start to think bigger. And by thinking bigger, we can help connect better with funders, because funders always have big ideas. There are big things that they want to support. They have a philosophy that they want to employ, to use, to change conditions for people. Then who will benefit? So maybe you're trying out a new technology. Sure, your farm will benefit, or your operation, the way you do things will benefit. But is there also some transferable way that by incorporating a research component, others will benefit as well? Could others learn by what you investigate? And then how? So once you ask the big why question, sometimes, if you're working towards improved nutrition, sometimes you might go back to this question of, what is it that I want to do? Well, I know that I want to improve nutrition, and what I thought I wanted to do was this project, but it turns out that maybe a better way of getting to improve nutrition is to do something differently. And so working back and forth between the what, why, and how questions is really important as you're developing your idea. So along with developing your ideas, refining your idea. And for me, this is talking through it, thinking about it with others who have other information. And primarily, you want to talk with your team. If you're an organization, you want to talk with people who know things about budgets and timelines and bureaucracy and how realistic and how feasible is this? Does it match your mission? If it's a family, you want to talk a family business, you want to talk through it with your family and anybody who might be affected by a change of plans or modification of things as the way they've been done in the past. You also want to bring in some partners and advisors. Sometimes there are state and federal agencies. Sometimes a group like Purdue Extension could be a resource. There are many people who can help think through projects, who can help point you to others who've done similar kinds of things before or suggesting paths for learning more about what it is that you don't quite know yet. You may want to do some research on best practices or what's been done already. Are there research projects about, say you want to do something with high tunnels? That's a hot topic that's been in focus for the past decade or so. There's probably a lot of research about what's been done so far, but there's still new applications and new ideas that are very much in line and opportunities for that. So thinking about some opportunities in that respect. The more research you've done, the more likely it is that you'll be able to come up with an innovative project or idea. And that kind of goes along with other implementers. If you're looking for beginning farmer grants, what have other beginning farmers proposed and how have they been successful? If you're a community organization trying to organize a local foods movement, what have they done? What lessons have they learned that they would be willing to share? And in this world, there are a lot of friendly folks who are very willing to support others along this path. So if you need some help connecting, sometimes Purdue Extension and state agencies can really help with that. All right. So big question at this point in time, after you've really thought through your idea, you've fleshed it out with your team and others, one of the questions is, are you really ready for grant writing? And part of that is it congruent with some of your other planning? To do something differently, have you really planned for what that might mean for your operation, for your organization? Is this your best means for funding? Sometimes a loan is a more expedient way to get funding or a more likely opportunity. Sometimes there are local corporate grants that don't involve sponsorships that don't necessarily involve a request for proposal process, going through a full grant proposal. Is there something new that you want to try? And oftentimes some of these grants are really looking for something different than what you've been doing already. They really want to see programs expanding either to new audiences or new approaches. I think if you listen to the webinar from last week, each of those grant opportunities is really looking for a specific thing. So figuring out what it is that you want to do might be one of those questions to ask. Is the grant appropriate for this? And then lastly, do you have the time and commitment to write and implement a grant? It kind of goes back to, is it really feasible to be doing this? Am I overtaxed already? Even if I had extra money and extra equipment to make something else happen or extra staff, could we really manage the project as well as it needs to be managed? So this next piece, I'm going to introduce it, and then we'll spend a lot of time on March 28th going through the pieces of this. So that'll be kind of part two of the piece that I'm I'm going to talk about, which is really the actual nuts and bolts of writing a proposal. So anytime that you are looking for a grant proposal, you are likely to come across these 6 different components. So the first is an introduction. That's usually an introduction of who you are and what you're about and maybe some history that you have. And then there's a statement of need. So this is that kind of those big mission questions about what's happening in the community, in the world, in agriculture, in local foods. What's happening that makes your project or proposal important? What will you answer with what it is you're going to do? So then you have a process or work plan, and this is often what we think about when we say, what is it that we're going to do? So this is the nuts and bolts of your whatever it is that you're proposing, whether it's implementing a program or modifying your operational practices. This is the who, what, when, where, and why piece here. Okay, and then expected outcomes has to match up with your statement of need. So what is it that you see happening in the world, whether it's a lack of connection to agricultural practices and what that can mean. It can mean potentially poor nutrition or misinformation about agriculture and how it works. Then your expected outcomes should match that. So you can be expecting that if you implement an agricultural program about, say, where your food comes from, then your expected outcomes could be that by knowing more about our food system, participants will improve their nutrition. They will have a better understanding of agriculture in their own community and potentially get involved with agriculture. Something like that could be some of your outcomes. So what's the community change that will be different based on what you do? The last two pieces here are important. So the evaluation plan, how are you going to know that you accomplished what you said you were going to accomplish? Are you doing some kind of measurements or surveying or interviews, something like that? And then, of course, a budget. So a budget is showing that you have planned for your project adequately, knowing exactly how much a project would cost to implement, what all of those steps are, and that you know you have a plan for getting that funding, whether some of it's coming from a grant and other is coming from other sources, or if it's entirely funded by the grant. Those are all questions to answer with a budget. Again, we'll go into these 6 elements in more detail on March 28th at that webinar. Okay, so the next step then, once you have a draft proposal, is to take that draft proposal and look for some funders. And oftentimes these days this is accomplished online. There are many different grant opportunities that are listed on various websites. And certainly in this series, there are many that are mentioned related to local foods and agriculture. And it could be that places like certain libraries can help with that search as well. However, the things that we're looking for, the kinds of keywords that you might check and how grant funders are organized are in several different ways. So you might have funders that fund all of the U.S. They might fund Indiana. They might even fund your town. Let's say there's Kellogg's plant in your town. Well, Kellogg's might have a particular interest in funding a project that comes from your community. And they may not have a particular interest in funding a project that comes from a different community. So it's important to kind of look at what the grant funder says is their geographic focus. So others are areas of interest. What is their mission? What are their priorities? Remember, like job searching, the more you can match missions and priorities, the better fit it will be. Then funding amounts. Some funders say right on their application, we fund projects up to $5,000. Well, if you have a $100,000 project, that may not be a good fit. And the opposite is true. If you have kind of a small project, it may not be the kind of fit for a funder that's used to funding multiple thousands of dollars in projects. They're looking for a different scale of change. So the type of projects or programs that are funded, so seed money would be like the beginning farmer can help support some monies to get something started or an organization started. Operating are kind of those ongoing expenses that fund your organization without, necessarily attributing it to a specific program. A lot of funding that's out there is for programs, so that would be something new that you're going to do in the community or with your project that isn't necessarily changing the structure of your organization. It's something new that you're going to add on to what you're currently doing. Equipment, that's kind of self-explanatory, but it could also be farming equipment, sometimes even vehicles and things like that. Matching, I guess I would maybe take this out of this lineup here, but matching means that there is some kind of expectation that you'll come up with part of the monies in some way, and part of it is being requested from the grant. That's pretty typical. And then capital is those bigger expenditures like buildings and fixed equipment, things like that. So there are guidelines and funding cycles. And again, you might not want to, if your project needs to be accomplished in the summertime because of seasonality, you may need to look for funders who make their decisions in the winter and kind of plan ahead for that timeline. Another distinction is the type of funders, and I didn't put that on this list, but I have mentioned a couple of times state and federal agencies have grants that they offer. And then there are corporate funders, there are private foundations, there are public foundations, and there are family foundations. So there are different ways to be thinking about funders, and each funder kind of has its own style. Some are very formal. Some have very informal applications. Like if you're in Indiana, you have a local community foundation. Most of those have gone to a very simple application process, and most of those only fund nonprofits. So knowing some of those things in advance of looking for a project is helpful. There are ways you can also look at the funders' tax forms in order to get more information about the kinds of projects they funded in the past. So we can discuss that at a different time. Okay, so some funding search tips. Again, really start by knowing your project. You'll save yourself a lot of time sifting through funders that aren't appropriate by knowing what it is that you want to do, knowing what some of those keywords are that you can search for, especially with respect to the mission. And then focusing on that outcome and impact. A funder wants to invest in you because they want a change in the community, not because you're a great person and you need money. So they really want to be focusing on what it is that you're going to achieve, and the more you can help kind of translate that will contribute to your success. And then really figuring out your budget needs, thinking about the staffing and the equipment fully. will help you in the long run. I think sometimes we under budget what it is that we need to accomplish what we're thinking that we are going to do. Okay, so after finding funders, we can then customize our proposal to meet the expectations of that funder. So the first and continuing advice to share with you is that it's really important to follow all of the instructions. And this is kind of what makes and breaks a proposal on the writing side. It's really following those instructions, from the details of how long a proposal should be, how many words each section could be. Sometimes it's a font type or a page length. And then if there are instructions within each section of the proposal, to make sure that those are followed clearly. The next is to adapt the need to that specific funder. So you may have several kind of reasons for what it is that you're doing, but you're going to have to tweak that a little bit or maybe change the wording. Perhaps there's a funder who's concerned about nutrition, but they're also very primarily interested in children's nutrition. And maybe you want to kind of revisit what it is that you are focusing on in your project to adapt to children's nutrition. And then you want to make sure that your expected outcomes match this adapted need, so that you're especially making sure that you're measuring children's nutrition somehow. So editing to the appropriate length, oftentimes your kind of draft proposal will be, let's say after you draft all of your ideas out, it's 4 pages. You can shorten that or lengthen that, or shorten and lengthen certain segments to help fit the expectation of a funder. And then very importantly is to assemble all of the attachments. So these are the other pieces of a proposal that a funder is going to ask for. And not all funders want the same information. Some may request a letter of support from an advisor or a partner. Some may request budget or quotes for equipment. They might say, please attach 3 quotes for some kind of equipment. They may want a brochure or something additional that shows a little bit more about how you're communicating your program to the public. So whatever they ask for, make sure you have it. If there's something you want to attach that isn't in the requested list of attachment, you might want to inquire, if that option is open, inquire to see if it's okay to attach. So the kind of final piece here is really building relationships with funders. As much as we think that our idea is great and think that it speaks for itself, people give to people, and we know that building relationships with people can help establish trust. And when you engage in a relationship with a funder, it's really important that they trust you. They trust that you are who you say you are, that you can achieve what you say you can achieve, and that you're going to be a good steward of funding that you're entrusted with. So there are a couple ways to do this, and it's an ongoing process from the grant search or from the search for funders kind of time frame all the way through the completion of the project and into reporting and beyond. So pitching your idea is having that formal or informal conversation with a funder about what it is that you want to do. Sometimes this is appropriate, and sometimes it's not encouraged. But having your funder being part of that team that helps you refine what it is that you're expecting, that you're going to write about. And, of course, being respectful of their time and process, maybe setting clear meetings if you have some questions for them, setting a meeting to to talk for 15 minutes and then sticking to that is part of that. Also being aware that they have potentially a lot of proposals and they may not remember exactly what yours entailed. Helping connect with them in the way that they want to be communicated with after applying, after receiving funds, being respectful. So another piece of this is that oftentimes there are some changes with, especially with respect to personnel and with respect to budget. So you may have your best estimates in your initial budget, and yet something can happen. Staff person leaves or a family member is unable to work or some other dramatic change, and you need to modify your proposal. Or a piece of equipment that last year when you wrote the proposal was $5,000 is now $10,000. So some of these major changes are important to communicate with your funder in advance of taking action on that. And they can decide if they are going to support it, or there are occasionally times where they can find some additional funding, or at least give you the flexibility to shift parts of your budget from one line item to another. So then, of course, delivering clear, timely reports is going to be important to help maintaining that relationship with funders. Sometimes you're going to be going back to the same funder a couple of years down the road, or if it's the kind of grant that's option to renew each year. You want to make sure that you're an A student here, getting all of your reports on time, doing what it is that you're saying you're doing. And, of course, following through is a big part of that. Following your work plan as you've stated it in the proposal is really important. So, again, it's really important to be clear with your team and with yourself that this timeline is doable and practical, that your budget is doable and practical. You don't want to underestimate the amount of time it takes to accomplish some of these tasks. You certainly don't want to underestimate or overestimate the budget too much. All right. So, again, going through those steps,